Hi, this is Josh, and welcome to the American Hearts Podcast, streaming live on Facebook and YouTube. This is episode 3. Very glad that you could join us today. Today, we'll be talking about relationships and intimacy. That is our theme for the day. And I just want to open up by, talking a little bit about those two items. Oh, and by the way, I'll also be joined by my friend Petula, who will be joining us here in a moment. And together we came up with these themes of relationships and intimacy. And what that brought up for me when we were talking is just that all the ways in which we have relationships in our life. There's family, friends, ourselves. Maybe the most important relationship I know that I have is with myself, because all my other relationships stem from that. And then there's other things like our communities around us, our government, which is a big one lately. Relationships to truth, right? We live in a society where there seem to be at least two very divergent sets of truth for some, based on our political beliefs and what we choose to tune into. And then there's relationships with others, especially, there's those we love, there's those we are close with, and there are those that, we love and they have a different relationship with truth, or what they consider to be necessary for our society, our country to better itself. And those can be some of the most challenging. And intimacy, what came up for me is just the different kinds of intimacy. There's emotional intimacy, spiritual intimacy, being able to be close to people on a spiritual basis and be vulnerable enough to share that. Physical intimacy, of course, which is what a lot of people think of when they think of intimacy. I think of intimacy both in a wide range, right? It's where we can be intimate with ourselves. And I really, getting that intimacy requires a pretty deep level of vulnerability in order for us to be truly intimate with someone. It's one thing to be physical with someone. It's another thing to be physically intimate or emotionally intimate. It takes a level of trust and vulnerability, which is sometimes difficult depending on who we're talking to and being with. And the intimacy piece with ourselves, we've talked a lot about this podcast being a place where, my invitation to you is to get to know yourself better. And I really have that for me, in that it's about vulnerability and intimacy with myself, trusting the voices in my head, if you will, the feelings I have, the things that we all have that can make our lives challenging. We go walk into a party and we want to show up and smile and meet everybody and just be happy, easy, and free. And we kind of shrink into the corner because we're frightened. We're scared or we're anxious. That to me it's first a job of true intimacy with myself. I was just at a show last night and there were a bunch of people around. I went by myself and I was like, oh, there's some people here I could probably go talk to. And I felt a little shy. That is vulnerability that comes with intimacy. And I have grown intimate with myself enough to know that, like, hey, it's okay. I can be here with myself. I don't have to beat myself up for not going over and talking. I don't have to force myself to go show up with someone else. I could just be with myself and have that intimate, vulnerable space to hold for me and to be okay in that. So I've been starting these episodes with an invitation. My invitation to you is to take a look at the relationships in your life, especially the ones you consider to be important, that may need some level of repair, or relationship maybe that you want to bring more intimacy into, whether that's emotional, spiritual, physical, or some other form of intimacy. And ask yourself, how can you begin the process of beginning that repair, or engaging in what you need to engage in order to bring in the intimacy that you want in that relationship. And that can be, that in and of itself is challenging just in regular day-to-day life with people that we like and agree with. It can be even more challenging in a world that's so divisive, where people have different relationships with the truth. People have different understandings, some of which we agree with and some of which we vehemently do not agree with. We live in a time where people have really been torn apart. Families have been torn apart. Relationships have been torn apart. People are just not talking anymore. They're unfriending, unliking their family members, people they once had close relationships with. And sometimes that can be hurtful on both sides, not just the unfriending, but realizing that someone else feels a particular kind of way, believes in a truth that directly questions maybe who we are, who you feel yourself to be. So that's my invitation to you, to take a look at those relationships and to look at whether you want to start repair, whether you want to be more intimate. Maybe there are some where it's just not safe, and that's okay too. But it's a place to look and explore for yourself. And then, of course, what is your relationship with yourself like? Can you be vulnerable and intimate with yourself, really knowing yourself and trusting yourself? And if not, there's some work to do. And that's part of why I started this podcast, for all of us to get to know ourselves better and to get to know each other better. So in the spirit of getting to know each other better, I have my friend Petula as a guest today. She is going to, she is the one that suggested the themes of relationship and intimacy. I'm really grateful that she brought that in to the space today. And I'm going to get to know more about her. We're getting into an area of her life that I really don't know much about, so this will all be new to me too. I'm going to bring up Petula and have her join us. Welcome, Petula, to American Hearts Podcast. I'm so glad you're here. And really grateful that you are willing to be here, willing to share from your heart. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to share with us today.
Hi, Josh. Very happy to be here. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Can't believe it's almost Christmas. And probably Hanukkah for some. I'm not really sure.
Yeah. So thank you. Yeah,
So,
as I said, thank you for having me. And I'm so appreciative to have the opportunity to talk about a topic I've been wanting to talk about publicly for a little while now.
yeah. So you brought the topic of relationship and intimacy up, and I know you've got, just from what I know of you, this is a big piece of your life right now. And growth is looking into relationships, experiencing relationships. I've heard you talk about dating, and I'm curious, like, where are you today with that? How are you? One of the questions we talked about yesterday was how are you experiencing that in today's world, today's society, where there's lots of divergent viewpoints? We just had an election. There's going to be people who are conservative, people who are liberal in the dating pool. And there's going to be, and there's a lot of divisiveness. So tell me about what relationships and intimacy looks like in your life today. And, maybe how is that impacted by just the world around you?
Sure. Okay. Would it be okay if I talked about my family history first?
Absolutely. Yeah, wherever you'd like to
Because
start.
I think that does kind of that will help to bring the context of answering your first question about how relationships and intimacy look like now. If I talk a little bit about my family history, so then I think it would probably make more sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I grew up, yeah. So I grew up in New York City. Um, it was a really big city, and my brother and I were born in a traditional mixed race home with a mother and a father. Um, and relationships looked very hierarchical. The father was the leader of the household, the mother
Hmm.
was a stay-at-home mother. Um, and that's kind of the framework in which I think I based what relationships or family life should look like.
Yeah.
Let me also mention that we're in the holiday season, um, and it's there's a lot of love in the air, and I don't think we can really discuss relationships and intimacy without mentioning love as well.
Yeah. You want to tell me more about that?
Sure. So I grew up believing that you love and honor your parents.
Hmm.
Coming from a dominantly Chinese heritage, your parents are kind of the leaders of the household, and
Hmm.
that's who you follow. In fact, our culture also says that all elders, are the leaders, and the children are followers. And
Hmm.
that's where I learned what love was supposed to look like, and in terms of intimacy, what was interesting was um, you could be very close with a sibling or a cousin, um, someone of the same kind of age group as you,
Hmm.
um, but the intimacy level with an elder would look very different. It
And you
looked
mentioned,
a little more distant because you were to revere your elders.
hmm.
Mm,
Yeah, yeah. You
yeah.
mentioned your culture, and I know we've talked about this before, and you had two cultures, but maybe one that was more predominant in your household. Like, which culture is this, or is it both that had this framework for you?
The Chinese culture.
Okay.
The Chinese culture was the dominant one, and that's
Yeah.
where I learned what I was kind of raised in that dominant culture. The other heritage, which is a Bayesian heritage, was not as expressed in our household. I
Yeah.
didn't really find out that specifically that heritage until later in life. I had a genealogist kind of help me find out where my paternal grandmother's family came from.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So let me continue. So
Yeah.
then when I was a teenager, what happened was I was actually informally adopted by my father's sister and brother, due
Mm-hmm.
to the fact that there was a lot of childhood adverse events that was happening in the home that I had experienced with my mother and
Mm-hmm.
father. And so my brother ended up staying with my biological parents, and then I ended up being raised by my aunt and uncle. So the good news was I was able to stay within the family. We didn't have to
Yeah.
have legal involvement in where then I would have been in foster care or adopted by a completely different family. And that happened around
Wow.
the age of 11,
Okay.
when I was about 11 years old. And in that relationship, that dynamic, because my second set of parents were siblings, love and relationship and intimacy looked different a second time.
Yeah.
Because my aunt and uncle got along very well. They had two separate residences, and I
Mm-hmm.
lived with my uncle. Um, And also the dynamic was different in terms of gender rolling because my aunt was actually the breadwinner in that
Hmm.
family dynamic. And my uncle was the homemaker for the most part. I mean, he worked, but
Yeah.
and he was also had to be the disciplinarian, but he did a lot of nurturing and kind of more of the what traditional the female, the motherly role was. My uncle filled that in, and
Mm-hmm.
my aunt filled in more of the paternal lead of the family. And she went out and she traveled for work, and she brought in a lot of resources for me to enjoy as a teenager. So with
Yeah.
my biological parents, we were lower income. We were almost at poverty level, in fact. But then when I was raised by my aunt and uncle, we were at least middle class, if not upper middle class.
Hmm.
So then for me, the socioeconomic dynamic changed. I had no
Yeah.
idea, of course, because I was a young person. But now looking back, I see then I also developed a relationship with money during that time as a teenager. Um,
Yeah.
so as we're talking about relationships, I also want to point out different points in my life where relationships are not necessarily with people. They can also be with things like money, school slash career,
Mm-hmm.
and other in the community. So there's a lot of relationships. Um, and I think that's important to point out in my background because even though I had a lot of adverse childhood events before the age of 11, when I went to school, my relationship with school was always a safe place for me. I
Mm-hmm.
got very good grades. I got along with the other kids. And conversely, my brother got into trouble in school. He also experienced the similar or same adverse childhood events, and he looked like he was acting out a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
And I was more of the quiet, studious one, so I was not as recognized unless it was report card time, uh,
Yeah.
and a parent teacher night, then I got recognized so very little. But my brother got a lot of attention from the whole family, in fact. Um, so I want to say that my relationship with school was the safe place. And then when I lived with
Mm.
when I was raised by my aunt and uncle, school was still a place where I excelled. I ended up going to a STEM high school in New York City, one of the
Yeah.
best in the country. I am a
Mm-hmm.
tech knight. For anybody
Okay.
listening that knows what that means, we're all over the country, in fact, and we have Nobel Prize winners from my high school. So, and then that translated into my college, graduate school, into my career. So, my relationship, as far as what I did as a career or vocation, was always positive. I look fantastic on paper, basically.
Yeah.
Um, you know, um, yeah, I look fine. But as far as people, if we go back to my relationships with people, so let's just say that in my career and in school, I that's what I loved. I actually put all of my love in my schooling and my career. And I also want to touch on religion too. So I wasn't raised, I was baptized as a Catholic, and then I was not raised in any faith during the time with my biological parents,
Mm-hmm.
nor with my aunt and uncle. Um, but I know my aunt was my godmother because she was there at my baptism, and I didn't know who my
Yeah.
godfather was. Um, and and then later on in life, when I was in my mid 20s after college, when I was starting my career, I ended up losing my biological father. Um,
Mm.
And that grieving process for me led me to the Catholic Church. And then I ended up getting confirmed 5 years later. And then
Mm.
in my 20s, even though my first love was my career and school, because I was in graduate school then too, I started to love religion, my Catholicism. I ended up loving that, and I formed an intimacy there as well.
Yeah.
So alongside my career and graduate school, I started to fall in love with the Catholicism, with the religion of Catholicism there. And I didn't necessarily focus on people. You know, I was a young woman, well educated, living in the Boston area where there's so much schooling and a lot of young people, hippies. I don't know if they still use
Mm-hmm.
that term, but there was a lot of hippies. And so I was part of that. I mean, I was part of that. All my friends were hippies. Nobody was looking at marriage. We were too young for that. Everyone was kind of waiting for that, and we all focused on our careers. But I found a lot of love and peace um, with religious people and my other parishioners at my church. And I wanted to become a nun. I wanted to go into
Mm.
religious life. Um, and I ended up getting turned down. Yeah, I ended up getting turned down, and now I'm in my 30s. And that made me really sad because I thought that this would be a way for me to have a family. I
Mm.
wanted desperately to have a family. I think because my in my when I was being raised by both sets of parents, it felt very fragmented,
Yeah.
and I was estranged from my brother too, so I didn't even have a sibling relationship to lean on. So it was very sad for me. I can admit that now. I didn't understand that back then, but I was sad with my people relationships. They were a disappointment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and my aunt and uncle, to this day, I'm still very close to them.
Mm.
Um, but I think in my 20s, I was disillusioned in how much love that there was in my family of origin. It was just hard for me to see.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear that. It seems like you just hit a very tender spot. Take your time.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, it seemed like that really touched something for you.
Yeah, it was I was sad and I wanted excuse me. I wanted the Catholic Church to adopt me.
Hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what definitely hear and feel that maybe I don't know if it's pain, um, but what did that bring up for you when we wanted that, you'd formed the relationship with the church. It felt like home, it felt like family. And then in the process of becoming a nun, you weren't accepted. Like, you open to talking about that?
Sure. It was sorry. Oh, sorry. Okay.
It's all right.
It was
Go ahead.
sad. It was sad. And, I ended up getting married in my 30s also. And that ended in divorce. We were married for a really short time. And then I went into discernment to become a nun again. And they turned
Hmm.
me down again.
Hmm.
So I think the bigger heartbreak was after the second time, because
Yeah.
I also had a failed marriage
Hmm.
with no children as well. Um, and I also think that heading toward my 40s, it was like the big 40. What does my life look like? I had a great career in the pharma biotech industry, and yet, I didn't get that. My heart ached for a sense of family. And
Yeah.
even though I felt like I was a part of the Boston community and I had great friends around me, and I had the fellowship within my church, I felt left out. Yeah, I did feel left out.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
didn't know what intimacy was at the time. And my connections with people were pretty superficial. Um, I didn't really give a lot of myself. Um, I became somebody that was um, I kept my private life separate from other people to what I was struggling with.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was sad in a lot of ways. I mean, I think also I would reminisce about some of my childhood experiences that were unpleasant, and I wanted to erase it and make it all go away. Um, so that was um that was hard for me. It was challenging, and I didn't know how to get out of that cycle of grieving. I
Hmm.
wasn't sure. I mean, I was in therapy, psychotherapy, but I don't think it was enough. Yeah, it wasn't enough. And I was on antidepressants, but it wasn't enough. I mean, it kept me to be a high functioning career woman, um, but it wasn't enough in terms of love and intimacy. So I had the relationships, um, but I didn't have love and intimacy necessarily.
Yeah.
And that's why I think this topic is so fascinating, because sometimes you can have love and intimacy. Sometimes you can have relationship separate from love and intimacy. And then other times you can have intimacy and not have the other two, which is love and relationship.
Mm-hmm.
They're kind of all very different,
Yeah.
or at least they can. My experience is that they can be.
Yeah.
Because like with my second set of parents, I love them dearly, and our relationship is biological, and yet a lot of things were pretty on the surface. I couldn't really talk about my feelings or what I was going through unless I needed their help, and then they were just there to solve it, but not to just be with me. At least not at that time. And then since I was headed toward my late 30s, early 40s, I had a meltdown in right around when I was 40 years old. I had a meltdown, and I became suicidal. And I was remembering that I was suicidal as a child before I got adopted. And here it was again. And I couldn't for the life of me, I could not understand what I did wrong, right? I was like, I did everything a good girl was supposed to do. I got all my degrees. I have a good job. I own my own condo. I became Catholic, wanted to become a nun. I became a wife too. And then he divorced me. So and then I got an annulment. But then I was like, wow. So the husband left me. The church won't let me go into religious life so I could have a family. And then my own family is kind of a mixed bag, so how is my need going to get met, and so I think that's what it was. It was kind of like a crisis for me, on many different fronts. I did lose my job too. I actually lost my job, and I think that was the straw that broke the camel's back, as they say.
Yeah.
And then I found 12 steps, and I learned that what had just happened, my meltdown, is called a bottom. We call it a bottom. And that wasn't my first bottom. But it's the one that got me in the rooms. And I became a very dedicated 12 steppers. I went to meetings. I practiced the steps. I started one program and then went to another one. I learned that my father drank a lot. And since I wasn't addicted to drugs or alcohol, I went into the process types of fellowships. So, and what we do there is we work the steps, and we focus on ourselves, and we do a lot of self-care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just want to say there's so much of your story I can relate to. My childhood was very different. My family unit stayed together, and as you talk about getting into your 20s and feelings of disconnection, and so much of it is I can relate to. So, yeah, you've taken us through so much, Sparkle, and I so appreciate that. And I'm curious, like, having gone through all the trials and tribulations you went through, and the relationship that led to a divorce and annulment, and the relationship with the church that it sounds like it's still very very meaningful to you and where your heart is. And now 12, and then 12 step. Where do you find yourself today? If you're ready to get there, I don't know if you have more between then and now, but I'm curious, like where has all that led you to? Like, who is Petula in today's world?
Okay, thank you for that question. So, yeah, I've been a 12-stepper for almost 13 years now. And the last program I was in was about love and sex. Yeah. Which I consider for me, that's a premier program for me, because I think ever since I was a little, I think ever since I can remember, I've been wanting a family unit, right? My search for that family unit in all my relationships, whether it was my school or my career or my religion or with friends, and then with my marriage as well. I've been what they call sober dating now for 4 years. And what I'm finding, as someone who's I'm in my early 50s now. It's tough out there. Because various ways of meeting people has changed a lot over the last 20 years. I mean, people are not really meeting in real life. They're meeting more online. But I also think that the marketplace has changed a lot too. So in my experience, I dated only, in my 20s and 30s, more so dominantly using real life to meet eligible bachelors. I'm heterosexual. And now it seems like a majority of how I'm meeting men is either through a matchmaker or online. I'm also meeting them in real life too. But that's the majority of what's happening. And it's been interesting to meet people, hear their story, having some understanding of what they're looking for, but more so, I like the interaction with somebody brand new because I love to get to know people. I'm actually very social now, and I enjoy the company of people. So I meet both men and women to socialize, and if it happens to be an eligible bachelor, I might be with them a little more on the one-on-one interactions to get to know them, to see if something can blossom, so to speak, right? It's been great. I mean, I met some wonderful, wonderful gentlemen. I live in Boise, Idaho now, which is a far cry from New York and Boston. And the men are different. They're a lot taller, I gotta say.
I did not know that Idaho was known for tall men, or that New York and Boston were known for more average size, shorter men. I don't know.
Yeah, no, average. I would say average.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have some tall men. And I think what's nice is because I have a faith background. I have faith-based backgrounds in both Catholicism and 12-step, also Buddhism. I follow also Eckhart Tolle, um, Adishante and Muji. So I have both, the kind of, if you want to call it, the Western spiritualities and the Eastern spiritualities combined.
Yeah.
I'm able to take care of myself, and I also I exercise a lot. So I'm taking care of my body as well. That's something I learned in 12 step, is just to make sure that I take care of my body, as well as my spirit,
Mm-hmm.
and my mind as well. I started meditating. I became a yoga and meditation teacher.
Oh, wow.
Um, and that's really helped with self-care, but also I love to give back, which is what we call, as a 12 step, we call it 12 stepping, right? We spread the
Mm-hmm.
message, give service. So I teach for free. And I work a lot with children because I want to become a mother someday. So I work a lot with children. I do a lot of other charity work with either um, in the food hunger crisis that we have here in the United States.
Yeah.
I'm also pro-life, so I do advocacy work there. Um, and yeah, I I feel like I have a fulfilling life. And I found, circle back to what I was saying about family life. I've circled back to understand that I have a family of choice, and they're very supportive. I'm in a lot of spiritual families. I'm in the Tech Night family, my alumni from high school.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have a lot of Asian American professionals that I'm still a member of that family. Of course, I have my family of origin. I have all my Catholic uh relationships as well. So I feel like, I wasn't, as of today, I haven't been able to build a family, find someone that wants to build a family together.
Yeah.
Um, is the traditional, having a partner, and both of us creating new life, um, co-creating new life together,
Mm-hmm.
and then raising children. Um, I'm still able to give back to the community and be part of the tribe in the lives of other children, because I
Yeah.
think it's important. Those relationships to me are very sacred because they're our future, and if we don't invest in our children, um, all children in our community, especially when we are discussing, you know other things like the political climate, global warming,
Mm-hmm.
and other things. And I also think that there is a social crisis right now too. That's my perspective now that I'm more social and going out there and forming relationships with people, making those kind of connections and looking at intimacy, the possibility of intimacy between me and another person, and what that might look like, whether we have titles or not have titles. I found that the current marketplace has so much different new terminology that did not exist when I was younger, and I'm sure didn't exist back in the 1950s and 60s.
Yeah.
It's very different. The social marketplace, social slash sexual marketplace now, in terms of people connecting and getting together, um, looks so different. And when I was married, it was going to be a traditional relationship. Um, so I think my vantage point is I prefer to have a traditional um, partner, um, if we're going to build a family, because I believe that that type of unit is going to have enough of the support and love and intimacy where we can create new life, co-create new life together.
And when you,
But I'm not,
if
but
I,
I'm not opposed, or I don't have anything against people that are doing it the non-traditional way,
yeah,
as well, because I'm sure they're finding ways to have their love and intimacy within their relationship, in their family dynamic, however it looks like.
yeah.
But
I'm
when
curious.
I've been dating, what I've seen is that people want different types of partnerships that are very short term. And I'm somebody that doesn't think that anything short term is really gonna be as satisfying and fulfilling for me
Yeah,
personally.
yeah. So I'm curious, how are you defining when you say traditional and non-traditional? What does that mean to you?
So traditional would mean that it's a long-term partnership, um, that where the two people have love and intimacy such that they're going to co-create life together. Like that's the commitment they have together.
Okay.
So it could look like that they have biological children or adopt children, or they give a lot of service to people in need. Because creating life can look like a lot of different things. But it would have to be a service oriented relationship, because that I feel that when you're traditional parents, let's say, right, you are servicing, you are providing a beautiful home with love for
Hmm.
those children to grow up in. So you are a a uh, a steward of service. You are.
Yeah,
And even
yeah.
if you're a married couple with no children in the household, but you serve the community in some fashion, you are still stewards. You're still creating life,
Hmm.
and to each other as well. I forgot to mention
Yeah,
that. Yeah, there's a
yeah.
creating life one another. That's why you're together.
Hmm.
And I feel that that's the basic, I said, very basic definition of what traditional um, partnership, marriage, relationship would look like.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, and then it just seems like in the marketplace that it looks very different. Um, it's just kind of serving needs short term to kind of get by. Um, or maybe that's the end point for them. I don't know. It wasn't from my understanding, it wasn't like that in the 1950s and 60s or even earlier.
Hmm.
And I think in the 70s, when we saw a lot of divorce, um, and just families looking different, um, and then socially, there was more of the influx of different people of different walks of life as far as sexual orientation, gender differences,
Yeah.
um, and more interreligious marriages as well. We found, and in interracial marriages, we found that it just started to look very different. But I think the basis, I think they still wanted traditional relationship. Um, but as of maybe the last 30 years, maybe, if I could be bold enough to say that, 20 to 30 years now, which is the current landscape now, right? That people are more, it's more popular to have something short term or extremely inclusive. There's the now it's actually very chic now to be polyamorous. That's what the young tell me in their 20s, that it's
Yeah.
very chic to be polyamorous.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I get the sense. I mean, when we talked earlier this week, we talked about kind of, we both grew up in the 70s and 80s. And, back then it was a time I remember of a number of divorces started coming into play, whereas maybe in the 50s, 60s, 40s, 30s, that was less of a thing. And as I was thinking about it yesterday, I kind of got I was thinking through the progression of this and what I know of. I'm in a traditional relationship as you've defined it. I'm heterosexual, married a woman. We're interracial couple. She's black, I'm white. Um, she had a daughter previously, so we're a mixed family. We have a child of our own, and I look out at the landscape now, and I've not dated for a long time, but I do know that I've got family members um, who are in, or family and friends who are in polyamorous relationships and are very happy. I've got, lots of friends who are gay and together and in what I would consider a very traditional relationship in the way of love, and they've adopted kids, and they're in a gay traditional relationship. And then it seems that kind of where I'm coming around to is, I don't know if it started in the 60s, 70s, but divorce became more normalized. This idea that we don't have to stay with the same person if we're unhappy. And then you've got mixed and blended families where the parents go and get married again. And I come from that world where my parents were together, and I have a half brother and sister from my dad's first marriage. So we had a blended family in that regard. And that's led to today, where people get more and more comfortable expressing who they are, saying really who they want to be in relationship to the world: polyamorous, gay, transsexual, transgender, you name it. And we're in a world that's both at once accepting of that, which I think helps people to, they see others that are like them. They see those of us who are allies show up in the world and support them in coming out. And we're also in this divisive side of the world. We're in a place where there's, part of the country that is very, looks at them as others them, right? Like something's wrong with them. They're not okay. This isn't traditional, and it's not okay. And it's a really interesting time we're in, where it's at once both welcoming, and there's a lot of people who are very scared and fearful of it, who are trying to take away the rights of these folks. Anyway, that was a bit of a long tangent, but that's what came up for me yesterday, is just this idea of both acceptance and rejection at the same time. And I can only imagine, as a person who's, a white, straight male, I can only imagine what it's like to be someone who either is, living one of those lifestyles, or is thinking about opening up and being open about what they want. How scary that may be. It probably is for many.
I would agree. It's hard for anyone to open up to another person
Mm-hmm.
in a one-on-one type of connection, with the hope or potential that this might be a potential partner, or spouse, right? Or someone you're going to be committed to, right? And I think because that challenge is hard, and the current generation has seen the failure of those attempts from the rest of us, or the older
Mm,
generation, they're considered the older generation or generation previously.
yeah.
They want a sure thing, and so they are gravitating toward all these short-term connections because they know they can be successful in them. The you know
Mm,
the challenge is really to go to something and long term, to have the intention of being long term, and with everything that comes with it, which is, the uncertainty of how long it's going to last, um, the possibility of creating new life, um, life's ups and downs, everything, trying to blend families, right? Because each person
mhm,
has their own family of origin that they're coming together. You know, they're not willing to take the risk. Is like my perspective. That's what I'm seeing as an outsider looking at younger people, and I
mm,
shouldn't even say that. Not even just the younger people. I think when I was doing the online dating, um, I saw that in the men that would approach me. They wanted something short term.
mhm,
Um, I have a couple of guesses of why they would approach me that way. Um, but my response was I tried to bring a consistent message to each one that I'm looking for something long term,
yeah.
and then kind of eliminate any candidates that really want something short term,
Yeah.
without putting any labels or anything like that. Because of course I don't know how this potential connection could evolve. We don't ever really know that. I've had some men that I've wonderful men, eligible bachelors that I met online, and we are very good friends now. I'm very good
Mm,
friends with them. Platonic friends that I spend time with because we have this shared interest. I happen to love watching sports
yeah.
and stuff. Oh, and playing sports. So yeah. So
Yeah.
have that in common, let's say. Um so I yeah, I mean I think that the influx in the last 50 years, the influx of different types of sexual orientation or inclusivity versus exclusivity type of relationships, I don't think that's where the problem lies, or the crisis lies. I think the crisis really lies in establishing whether our intention is going to be short term or long term. Because if it's going to be long term, if the person chooses long term, or and they want to see how this is going to evolve,
Mhm,
but they want to learn, but they want to get to know you as the person, like the real person on the inside and the
yeah.
outside, then I think that that's a gift.
Mhm,
It is a gift, because that means at least they're saying they're committed to getting to know you, and they're not going to just end the connection because because a certain need was met, and then they don't really need you anymore, because that does feel too transactional. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, I'm curious if we could step back for a moment, like, how are you defining this crisis? Because I hear, is it a difference between someone choosing a long-term relationship and a commitment versus someone who's looking for something more short-term?
No, I believe the crisis is that, I think that the people are becoming very polarized. And I can only speak in the heterosexual world because I
Mhm,
happen to be heterosexual, and that's mainly
yeah,
where I socialize. Okay. So in the heterosexual world, there's a polarity between men and women. They're not really getting together. Like, they're not making long-term commitments to one another, or the intent is not even there. That's the crisis. And I feel that what the ripple effect which is already happening, is that we're seeing a lower birth rate. We're seeing a lot of people that are coming from broken family units. Yeah, I think I think that's the crisis that we're having. And I think for long-term well-being, no matter what gender you are, whoever, like what type of person you are, I think that the quality of your long-term well-being is going to be based at least 50% of your life, at least. But I think it's higher than that. But let's just say, if we're going to say conservatively, 50% of that well-being, which is self-care, right, is going to come from at least one primary long-term relationship that you have.
And you're talking about a romantic relationship.
It can be, yes. I mean, for most people, it will be, yes. It will.
Yeah. I don't know if I mean, I hear where you're going with that, and I see it from both sides. Like, I'm still unclear like what the crisis is, because I know folks in my life that I love and care for deeply who have chosen not to have a one person, monogamous long-term relationship. They've been in them before, and they've decided that's not for them. Like, they are very happy with themselves. They are in long-term dating relationships, but not committing to that person in the form of marriage. They are also, and some of them are polyamorous, as you say, and they seem very happy. And I don't know, like, I'm curious, like, where you see a crisis, maybe do I just see people who are comfortable enough with themselves and to know themselves well enough and to choose something outside of the societal norm rather than choosing what society tells them should be in order to please society. So I'm curious, how do you view that, like someone's choice, very specific choice, to not be in a long-term relationship because they've decided that just doesn't work for them and their lifestyle?
Okay, so I would have to say, first off, let me clarify if there was a misunderstanding between us. I'm not saying that choosing to live a lifestyle of polyamorous doesn't include what is part of the crisis. That's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
Because I believe that the polyamorous relationship structure, the intention is to be long term.
It can be.
Yes, it is. Yeah. If we assume
Well, I
that it
guess,
is, for our purposes, that's not part of the crisis. I think the crisis is really that two people are not coming, either two people or a structure of poly. A lot of them are not forming something where the intention is long term. And that's the crisis, because maybe they feel like they don't need each other, or they only need each other short term.
mm-hmm.
And that's not true. I believe that for the quality of our well-being over the course of our adult life, or actually I can even say the whole lifespan, because my first 20 years, I was in a family unit. Even though there were two units, I was still in a family unit, and that was the intention, was long term. And I'm still with my second set of parents now, right? I still have
Yeah.
relationships with them. We are
Mm-hmm.
still a family unit. Unfortunately, I lost my brother 5 years ago, so I don't have a sibling, but I have a core family unit. My second set of parents are still alive, so the three of
Yeah.
us form. So I'm saying, and then as an adult, we should be going into another type of structure that's family life, is what we strive for. So traditionally, most people, especially in the hetero world, people get married, right? They get married, or they're in a committed relationship, and then they start having children, right? And that's, one way of doing it. I think that if you're and that's exclusivity, right? That's
Hmm.
exclusivity because it's monogamous. In the polyamorous choice, so to speak, if you choose that's the way you want to form your relationships, you're still in long-term relationships,
I see.
but it's also a hierarchy. You can be married to one of them or live in with one of them, or none, but you just have multiple partners, all of equal value, and the level of intimacy that you have with each one is going to be different because every dyad is different.
Yeah.
So what I found
Got it.
when now that I'm dating gentlemen, or I'm socializing with men and women, what I'm finding is I'm forming all these relationships, but my intention is always to keep them long term in my life, because because I feel that that will help, that contributes to my well-being, my long-term well-being.
Got it.
Yeah.
So
But the crisis, I really see the crisis is people are not even getting together. Does that make sense? I'm saying they're not even, they're making statements. If you go online in social media,
mhm.
you'll see people talking about how they don't even need each other.
I see. So
And
they're
that's
choosing
the
to
crisis.
reject the idea of relationships in the first place. Like they're okay by
No,
themselves. They don't really need
no,
anything more.
no. See, they want relationships, but it's short term, it's transactional, and it's only to get certain needs met, and then they're
Okay.
gonna part. The
Got it.
intention isn't to get to know somebody long term, right? And we can define that. I mean, I'm saying long term is, even if you said it is more than a year, which and that's being conservative too. Nobody is having relationships more than a year. They're having them so brief, like 6 months or less, or 1 month, or I mean, have you heard the term situationship?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's what I mean by there's all this new terminology out there.
Yeah. And so
And once
what?
you know the terminology, you understand that it's looking like people are saying they don't need, whether it's the other gender or the same gender,
Mhm.
they're not needing other people, and they're only forming connections. I don't define that as a relationship. They will still consider that a relationship because they're using words like situationship.
Got it.
So they're
And you,
connecting. It's the only way you
yeah,
can describe it. They're connecting, but what are they really sharing? And the what are they sharing is going to characterize the nature of that connection.
sure. And what is it that brings that to crisis level for you? What do you see as I mean, when I think of a crisis, there's something that is inherently, there's some result of a crisis that is going to be bad or not desired. So what are you seeing as the result that has it being defined as a crisis for you,
I think there's
for
a
the
lot
world?
of broken, yeah, I think there's a lot of broken people out there
Hmm.
because there's not enough education and not enough role modeling. If this newer generation continues as it does, not only is the birth rate going to go down, everyone's well-being is going to go down. And there's going to be a lot of broken people out there walking around just looking for connection. Everything's going to be short term, a la carte. You know, people are not going to try to do long-term relationships. Um, and the breakdown of even the family unit, the traditional family unit we've already seen that there's a crisis all around us. As far as mental health and pulling resources from the government. There's a lot of homeless people in a lot of major cities, just like
Yeah.
Seattle. And
Mm-hmm.
they would have been a product of, a broken family units or just mental health issues.
Yeah.
And they're pulling on the resources of the government. So as a society at large, I mean, it's a ripple effect. I think the social crisis affects the economic and then later on the political um, landscape as well.
Yeah.
And there's not enough caring about each other. Um, I see it going in that direction because everyone is just settling for, let's just do something short term,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the thing is, it's important to have relationships that are long term.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm following. What's coming up for me here is like when I think about, you know, broken homes and homelessness and um, uh, all of our societal issues, it seems to me that the missing piece is vulnerability is maybe one of them, right? If we are vulnerable, we're willing to open ourselves up to all kinds of different relationships and intimacy, which ultimately leads to um, a more fulfilled life, right? I don't think any of us is meant to be alone. Some of us may choose to be alone because it's difficult to be in relationship, but anyone who's left on their own for any for a long period of time is the human psyche is just not made to be with itself all the time, right? So I think what I'm getting at here is vulnerability can lead to all kinds of relationships, and broken homes don't necessarily lead to um, bad outcomes, right? A broken home could be a pretty rough broken home that leads to two very connected, loving, vulnerable, intimate homes for someone. And as long as there's love present and vulnerability, like that's going to lead to kids and adults who are happier, more content, more loving. And I think um, maybe the crisis you're seeing, I'm seeing in just from a different angle in that, and I see it as it's a reason why we are where we are today, politically in this country. Because, and not to say that the conservative agenda from a economic standpoint is wrong, or that pro-life, there's nothing like those are all fine policies and things are fine. But I think what ultimately put this particular administration over the top was this lack of vulnerability, the lack of ability to be with someone who's transgender, be with someone who's gay, to be with someone who's an undocumented immigrant and look at them first as a human being who's reaching out for help rather than someone who to be demonized. And it seems to me like, I don't know. I mean, I know people who believe some of those things and they have loving family lives. They love their kids, they love their families, and they have a fear in their heart of other people that are not like them, that leads to resentment, disdain, blame, all of these negative outcomes, which then lead to a society that's where things break down. That's where we stop caring about taking care of our neighbors. We stop caring about people who have found themselves addicted to opioids and end up on the street. We stop caring about the kid in school who's lonely and bullied and, ends up becoming depressed at 9 years old, and I don't know, the world, just relationships and intimacy, they all stem from personal vulnerability that allows us to be with ourselves in situations that are uncomfortable, with people who maybe, or ideas that make us uncomfortable. And that can lead to what I'm hearing you say, which is there's a number of people out there who maybe they either know themselves so well that they're like, all I really want is to have transactional relationships and I'm totally happy. Or the flip side of that is I'm not comfortable enough with myself to be vulnerable and enough to have relationships and intimacy. So I'm going to choose transactional ones because that keeps me safe. And that's where, a big part of this podcast is for people just like that, who don't yet feel comfortable with themselves, who are struggling with parts of them that are fearful, angry, upset, to the extent that they barely have a relationship with themselves, much less the world around them, much less being able to go on a dating site and be willing to commit to getting to know someone and being vulnerable enough to consider being in a relationship long term, whether that's a romantic one or a platonic one. So I don't know. I'm kind of coming back around to your premise, Petula, and I'm curious if that's speaking to you, if that's kind of in the same neighborhood.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. I do agree there is a lack of vulnerability, sensitivity, which is part of intimacy. That's actually falls under the definition. Um, and you have to have a certain level um of that vulnerability, and vulnerability takes time. Um, and it does take um being comfortable with yourself in order for you to be intimate and then share that with somebody else.
Yeah.
And because it takes time, it circles back to why I feel that long-term relationships is what it will hold a person in enough care and support that they will want to be in something long term, because there will be the intimacy there. The vulnerability facilitates the intimacy, and then the intimacy naturally will encourage a person to be in a long term relationship.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's not what's popular now. Or maybe that's just it's kind of unspoken too. It's very possible that it's just not spoken enough about the vulnerability and other aspects character, or I should say there's other characteristics that are not being valued and not being discussed as something when two people want to talk about what they're going to share together.
Yeah.
It's almost like we sweep it under the rug, that it's assumed or something. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's where that personal vulnerability comes in. Do I know myself well enough to trust myself to be vulnerable with someone else? And I realize with that, we're in our last couple of minutes here, and have to wrap up. So I'm gonna say thank you so much, Petula. It's such a pleasure getting to know you better, hearing about your perspective, and talking through all this with you. And thank you for just showing up and being vulnerable and being a person in the world who's willing to share her vulnerability and have this intimate conversation, and with someone who we're really just getting to know one another, even though we've known each other for several months. But it's been really a pleasure getting to know you over this last few months.
Okay, thank you, Josh. It's been great being here. Happy holidays to you and your family.
Thank you to you too, and safe travels back home. All right.
Okay. Bye now.
Bye. All right. So thank you so much, everyone. We're in our last couple of minutes here of the podcast, and I just want to thank you for sticking around, listening. I hope that you've heard something today that will help you to see in yourself where where you're doing relationships well, where you are doing intimacy well, and you have that level of intimacy that you want. And also, if there are areas in your life where you feel you could improve relationships with whatever is going on in your life, whether it's people or work, or as Petula said, money, huge relationship we each have in our lives. There's so many different ways in which we have relationships in this world, and so many ways in which each of us is doing them well, and each of us could do better. I know I can. So this has been a huge learning experience for me too. But I just want to say thank you for being here with the American Hearts podcast. This is episode 3, relationships and intimacy. If you want to go back to the beginning of this podcast, you can see the invitation to take a look for yourself at how you can see what relationships in your life may need some work, may need some repair, where you can build more intimacy in, where you desire it. And I hope that all that turns out